We also have.
This meeting is being recorded.
Got it. No worries. Do I need to say the rest comment again? No.
Yeah, please. Let's get it on.
Let's get it on record. So again, Paul Douglas, co-founder of the JPI Group. We're based in Philadelphia. We provide workforce planning, assessment, and consultation to companies across the industry. We do a lot of work in the renewable sector, so wind, solar energy, and hydroelectric. I am really excited about today's conversation for a few reasons. One is I do think today, if you look at today's market across all industries, there's such an influx of massive projects in the capital market, everything from infrastructure, healthcare, renewable energy. And I've seen more private equity and M&A involvement or interest in this community than ever. So I think if there's ever a time for us to be knowledgeable of what it takes, maybe the mistakes that we sometimes we can make and what steps we can take to move forward, it's now more than ever. I've had a chance to talk to numerous business owners over the past couple of weeks. I was at the EMSDC National Conference last week, and there's a lot of conversation around other MBEs buying and partnering with other MBEs. I've met no less than 10 MBE private equity individuals in New Orleans. So again, if it's ever a time to fully understand how succession planning works, why it's critical it's today. Our perspective is a little bit unique. On one hand, we do have kids. My wife and I, my wife is also the co-founder of the business, and our child is young, but we need to start planning now. Second, we are looking to purchase companies. So not only are we looking at what succession planning will look like for us, but we're very much in the field of looking at what does it take for us to purchase a company on our end. And then we have a small part of the business we want to sell. So we're looking at it from all these different perspectives. And what I'm learning more and more is, one, you need help, you need a good network, you need people around you in order to make this happen. So I'm excited about the call today. I'm excited about the panel we have, and I look forward to providing any insight that I can.
Thank you, Paul. Vance, what about you? Please introduce yourself to the group.
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I see in the chat, I have at least one person from Pittsburgh, but one Clevelander and a few Philadelphia folks. So I apologize for my Steelers lamp in the background. Anyone who can offend. We're not very good this year, so please don't be upset. So I'm a lawyer with McNeese, Wallace, and Nurek. We have offices all across Pennsylvania, and one in Maryland and one in Columbus, Ohio. I had the estate planning group, and what I do for the legal part of any succession planning, which is primarily what I do, is working with the other advisors and consultants that are involved, the accountant, the financial advisor, the banker, the whole team. And the team approach is very important in this kind of planning, I would stress. Once the plan or how the things are going to be carried out is decided, I would implement those legal documents. So whatever those would be, those legal agreements or other instruments that would be necessary to carry out the transfers of the property that is the business. So whether that's the operating business, the real estate that's involved, sometimes there's separate intellectual property rights that are not associated directly with the business that need to be transferred or licensed. All sort of under the umbrella of an overall estate plan for the clients, both the transferring generation and the transferee generation, need to account for a lot of uncertainties, through a will or trusts or any combination of those documents. So that's where I get involved. I really love what I do. I love helping people, go from one generation to the next and really maximize what's going on.
Great, thank you. And Nicholas, what about you?
Yes, thank you. First, just I'd like to thank Joyce and Aaliyah for allowing citizens to be part of today's discussion. Just on my background, I've been in the financial industry for 25 years, been partnering as a wealth advisor to business owners and individuals on their planning needs since 2009. On a personal note, the discussion today is really takes me back to a personal situation where, and really the reason why I pursued financial planning as a career, and why I believe it's so important to have a financial plan and succession plan in place. My father was a doctor and a sole business owner of a medical practice, had 20 employees, and suffered a career-ending stroke at the age of 49. And his succession was certainly untimely and was forced upon him. Certainly grateful that he had a plan in place to protect himself, his family, as well as his employees. I brought my practice here to Citizens because of the focus and expertise the firm has in addressing all needs of business owners, their families, the legacy, irrespective of the company size, be it from business valuation, royalty analysis, employee stock ownership plan valuation, mergers and acquisitions, transaction of fairness opinions, wealth management, insurance, to name a few. The goals of the business owners likely that are participating in today's call are as varied as those that might be planning for retirement. But a few common thoughts that one might be considering or should consider is, do you have a plan in place for contingencies today? Whether that's protecting against a life event or a disability, there are solutions in place to be able to deal with that. What is your evaluation of your business, and when was that last conducted by a third party? Best to start understanding early what your business is worth, well in advance of any transaction that you might be seeking or looking at. With 3 years of tax returns, even the smallest of companies on this call could get free valuations from outside providers. And do you wish to sell to an outside interest or have family members in part take it over? The other thing to maybe consider is, what is the preferred timing of the exit, and how have you coordinated that along with your financial plan and your tax strategy? So those are just a few of the items to think of.
Definitely. I agree with a lot that you've just said. And Joyce, last but not least.
Hi, thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be here today to talk to you all. My name is Joyce Petrenchak. I'm a Senior Vice President and Regional Manager for the Wealth Strategist at PNC Private Bank. I have over 30 years experience, and when I think about that, it makes me sound old. I'm not old. With working with predominantly closely held businesses that are family owned and advising our clients around business succession. Some of the things that I think about when I'm talking to my clients is one of the things that I saw come up on the screen at the beginning of the presentation. It was about joining forces and succeeding together. So working with your attorneys, working with your accountants, working with your bankers and your financial planners at your banking institutions, bringing your experts together around the table is extremely important for success in your business succession planning. I also think that, being flexible. I've worked with so many people that have said, we're going to sell in 10 years. And then the perfect offer comes around three years down the road. And, just doing the numbers, working with your professionals, and always being flexible around alternative plans, and making sure you're talking to that next generation. If you want to succeed your business to your children or employees, make sure you're having that conversation with them, because I've been in several situations where the next generation's like, I'm already 60 years old. I want to retire. And it's the 80-year-old father transitioning the business to his 60-year-old daughter. So, making sure that those plans are thought out and discussed. I also think people want to make more of an impact today. Legacy planning is extremely important. And whether that be around charitable planning or making sure that the owners that buy their business or are in line with their values. So I think that's become extremely more important these days and age. People it's more than just about the money and saving taxes. It's about legacies and aligning values. So I noticed in the chat something about succession planning for nonprofits as well. We've also helped clients with that as well, because nonprofits, although you might not have the same tax situations, it's important that nonprofits have a succession plan as well to continue their mission. So I'm looking forward to our discussion today. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Excellent. All right. Well, great. I think we have a very well diverse group of panelists here today. And I will also be chiming in from my perspective too on some of the questions. And then again, we look forward to answering any questions towards the end. So with that, I think a good place for us to start and this is open. So anybody who wants to really answer this question from the panelists, please go ahead. But what are some of the key exit strategies a business owner can take from a general succession plan or from an M&A perspective? Anybody want to take that question first? Paul, maybe?
I can. I want to touch on one small thing, Rex, as we kind of jump into this, because
Sure, please go ahead.
I think as a business owner, succession planning can be a very vague term if we're not careful. There's so many different categories of succession planning. I go in, you have leadership succession planning, you have labor skill set succession planning, right? You have the insurance, and there's probably 7 or 8 different categories. So I think really understanding that succession planning is a very broad term, and you have to really break it down. That's one of my biggest learning lessons over the past year, going through some of the conversations that we've had, is making sure that we truly understand what that means, and that we understand that it's a journey, right? You're never really done succession planning. In fact, once you start it, it's a continuous roadmap that you'll continue to build up on time as time progresses. As far as the different types, I'll tell you guys from our perspective, I think it was Nicholas, if I'm not mistaken, you said something that's critical for us is we want to make sure that the next generation has the same social impact that we had, right? I think that's one of the things that we consider all the time. It's based on the work that we put into this for the past X amount of years. Will this buyer, whether it's one of our child, one of our kids, whether it's someone right now in the current leadership team, whether it's a private equity firm, will this organization have the same values and mission that we created for it? And that's a personal decision for you to make, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a variety of ways. Again, there's so many options. I think Nick and those guys can go into all the options that you can create. From my lens, I'm looking at, if we do this, what's the long-term impact? Will this organization be the same? Will they embody the same values, right, as we did? Will they take care of their employees as we did? Those are the critical topics that's important for me and for my lens.
Definitely. I can just briefly say, I know from my perspective, it's I'm personally not married, or I don't have kids. So for me, it was really important to take what my parents created and then try to figure out how can I scale it and grow it quickly in order to get to the next level of where I want to go, and look at different business ventures and such. So for me, it was really important to consider succession planning, and then looking at private equity firms and different companies that we're exploring right now is how can I scale quickly, get the different technology assets for the company that will allow us to scale, and then exit within like a three-year time frame. So for me, it was more important on speed, and then somebody who could come in and really help me operate the company while I am out there selling. So those were some of the important things that I look back on when I figured, okay, what do I need to help me grow? And so those were some of the factors for me. Vance or Nicholas or Joyce, if you want to comment as well.
I think to Paul's point is taking it in smaller steps, and what's most important. So strategizing, triaging. A lot of times you're so focused on your business that you don't have time for the personal aspect of it. So you might not even have basic estate planning documents in place, or your buy sell might be in place, but it might not be funded properly. So some of those basic things, take care of as soon as you can, and then continue to build upon that. So it's not this huge daunting task that you keep on procrastinating about. Take care of the most important, and then go from there, and plan it out, right? So do the numbers, run the numbers with your advisors, and have that flexibility, because you might go down one road and decide it's not for you. So be open and to that flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point so far. Planning it out and making sure you take your time and being open and flexible. I think also just being clear on what you want, because I think that also helps open it up and make it a little bit more easier through the process. Okay, all right. So what are some steps a business owner needs to take to prepare for their exit? So looking at business valuations, are you looking at your competitive landscape analysis, and then analyzing where you are and where you're trying to go?
And I,
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
no worries. Again, I'm going to speak a lot from what we're going through as an organization. I think that the evaluation is something that most business owners just don't do, because you think that I don't need to do this until I'm ready to sell, which is, I think, one of the biggest mistakes. And once you do that evaluation, some of the things that we're learning is, one, if you include technology, your multiplier goes to X. If you're doing consultation, your multiplier goes to X, right? If your leadership team has these individuals on it, there's so many factors that you can start to control years in advance by doing a quick evaluation of your organization. And I would say that that's one of the, again, one of the biggest lessons that we're learning is sometimes you think I don't need an evaluation. And even if you don't want to sell, an evaluation will give you a sense of, hey, our company's worth X dollars, right? So worst case scenario, you know what you're dealing with. So that's one of the small steps I would recommend anyone on this call that's in that position. If you don't have it, it doesn't hurt. And in fact, I actually think it'll help you with your long-term strategy for the business.
What about from a competitive landscape perspective amongst you and your competitors in your industry?
I would say where that impacted us was understanding, one, what are the factors that will impact our evaluation versus our competitors? Again, what are these services that we can add? What are the roles? What are the markets we can go after? I'll give you guys a real life example. We've gone after the renewable space over the past 3-4 years. That's impacted our evaluation significantly because of the amount of funds that's being put in the market from recent legislation. Our strategy, our market, our services are now more valuable than it would have been if you would have stayed in X industry. So understanding the industry that you're going to go after, understanding where legislation is coming from. I think that's another piece they don't quite tell you is if there's money in the market for a particular project, a particular service or product, that also can have, I would say, intangible benefits for your evaluation. It's not just what your company does, it's other factors as well that's included.
Yeah. I think just from my perspective, before I'm going to ask Vance a little bit more, but I know from our perspective, evaluation was a great starting point. It really did provided an analysis for my business from all different perspectives, right? From the competitive landscape, from what are our service offerings, how does that fare and measure amongst the competition? And then it helped me realize everything that Paul was just saying as well. And I think Joyce was mentioning just the team and seeing the value of the team. Where do you need to add additional people? Do you need to add additional assets? Are there different areas that you can make it stronger? But I think one thing is always important from my perspective is there's never going to be this right time. It's going to be when it feels right and when you're just going to take the plunge and just go for it. And because otherwise it's just, there's always going to be a this or you feel like your company is growing and scaling fast and you don't need additional capital or help or a different owner coming into the company, whatever your reasons may be. But when you feel it and you know it's right, you got to just go for it, even though it may not be right if the company's growing. So I think it's just, those are some other factors to think about. But Vance, I'd be curious on your standpoint from can you share a little bit more on what it takes to have a accurate business valuation or anything from that you could share with the group?
Sure. Well, I mean, getting a sense of what your business is worth is very important. I think the main thing I tell people at that stage is you have to understand what your audience is going to want. Meaning, so if it's an internal transition with your family, you know, the value of the business is X. If it's a transition to a third party, an outsider, it's probably more than X. So because, you know, private equity firms or strategic buyers have a lot of capital that, you know, you don't as an internal buyer or transition party. So if your goal is to maximize the value, then a family transition is probably not it. And that's okay, but you just have to understand that your kids or your grandkids are not going to be able to pay you what a PE firm can. So you have to sort of accept whatever fate it is you want and then work towards that. And either way, I think one of the universal things is that the stronger management you have, the better you are, either for an internal or external transition, because the biggest mistakes I see are just what I call thin management, or, the person at the top who tries to do everything, or just really believes that business cannot possibly function without them, which typically is not true. And if it is, then you got to fix that because that's not going to work. I mean, Bill Gates does not run every single aspect of Microsoft, for example. So you have to get into that mindset, and just really, you can never start planning early enough. And I think that sentiment's been expressed in a number of different ways already, where you got to be thinking 3, 5, 7 years down the road, particularly if it's a family transition. And let's say mom or dad is 75 and your kids are 50. I mean, they may not want to work till they're 75, right? They may think at 60 years old, I'm done. And if that's the case, your window may have already passed to transition to them, because they don't want to sit around and pay you off for 10 years. They want to, do something else. And I've had a number of those where it was a bit extreme, but the dad was 86 and his son was 64. And they just sold the business because the son's like, I'm 64. I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
And the dad still owned the business and he just quit. So that was the transition. It was forced.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
but it was all, his dad just wouldn't let go, and that was the problem. So
I would agree. I've seen those challenges, and it is interesting. And I know within my own company dynamic, since it's a family transition, and then I think one of the more challenges that we face are they truly able to let go, right? I think those are some of the problems from a family transition. I'm not sure how it would come for Paul, for example, from a husband-wife dynamic, but it's a never-ending process. It's a learning journey. But Nick or Joyce, did you want to add into anything? Any comments on that from your perspective?
I would just add, if it's going to be a transition to family members, oftentimes you get situations where there's 1 or 2 children who are not going to be involved in the succession of the business. There may be one who is interested. So making sure that those values get assigned equitably. You may have a child who's got a special needs situation that needs to be addressed. So there, again, I think the theme of the prior conversation is do it early in terms of planning to get the best outcomes that you're looking for.
Awesome.
Rash, I was going to, I think it was Joyce that mentioned this. And I think anyone that's a business owner on this call can probably attest is, when do you find senior leadership? When do you start to bring senior folks in? That's a critical decision. This year, we actually identified a COO for the first time. And you guys know how this works is, on one hand, like, hey, how are we going to afford to pay this individual? And then on the other hand is like, how much money are we losing by not having this individual?
Yep.
So we invested in a COO, and based on my research, my conversations, probably one of the most critical things you can do as a business owner to help with your evaluation. If that individual comes in with ideally years of experience, they've scaled a company before, they understand the processes, the technology, they understand what it takes. That's what we've learned this year, is this individual, I wish we would have done this 3 years ago, if I were to go back. So if you're at that point, it depends where you are in your business, but having someone that can really own the operation side of your business is critical. The other thing that we've learned is sales. I think, again, most business owners, sometimes you tend to bring in the majority of your customers. That's not scalable, right? So we're also learning that the hard way, is at what point do you have a process and a team in place that can saturate your current clients? So those are business decisions that we've had to make this year to put us in a position to be attractive to a seller. But it's also things that we look for in companies now, because we're learning, if we want to purchase someone, is who brings in all your sales, right? Who handles your operations? So these lessons, as we're learning the lessons, we're actually applying that to our strategy to purchase companies as well.
Yeah. I also wanted to comment, Vance and Nicholas, you both mentioned about the family transition. Are there any other scenarios that you wanted to bring up in terms of different scenarios that you've seen in succession planning? I'd be curious if you have any other thoughts on that or stories to share.
Yeah, ESOPs are one.
Okay.
Employee stock ownership plans where you sell to your employees essentially. It carries its own risk because the business owner is usually seller financing a large part of it, and sort of has some skin in the game still. That's one way. Transitioning to your family, and then third-party transactions are really the 3 pots you fall into.
Okay.
But just drawing on what Paul pointed out about adding people. I mean, a lot of times people are looked at as a cost and not an investment, which I think is wrong, because if you think about it, I need to buy a piece of equipment, right? And it's going to take me 4 years to recover my investment in that in terms of sales or productivity, or, like capital equipment doesn't immediately return an investment, and neither do people sometimes. So you have to think over 3, 5, 7 years, if I hire person X to do activity Y, and that frees me up to do other things, I mean, that will eventually return, it'll give you ROI.
Right.
I mean, leverage is the most important thing that people overlook, by adding other people who are qualified to do things and take those things off your plate or do more of them, like whether it's sales or whatever, quality control, that's just going to add value. And it may take time to realize, but, that's where the value is in your people. I mean, anyone can buy a robot or a piece of equipment, but you have to have people to operate it and sell the stuff and, manage it. So.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. The only thing I would, I think that's a great point. And I also think the culture, if you're a company, and we all, I think culture is sometimes overused, but we all know that if you don't have a good culture, it's tough for your company to scale and grow. And I think that's the other piece that companies are looking for. When I ask investors, hey, why didn't that work out? It's never the product or the sales or the industry. It's normally the cultures clashed, right? So I think if you can figure out, well, what culture do we need to have in order for a transition to work? Because again, and again, Vance and Nick, you guys have seen this. I would love to hear your feedback. I've heard that's one of the top reasons why, again, mergers, acquisitions, transitions don't work, is just the cultures clash, right? Or the individual that took over, they were unable to create a vision and a mission strong enough as the previous owner. So I think keeping that top of mind as well does impact your strategy around succession planning.
And you actually just read my mind, because I was actually going to ask Vance, Nick, or Nicholas, or Joyce about if they ever had a situation where it did go wrong, and what did happen in that situation that you'd be able to share.
Yeah, I'll let Nicholas, or Joyce comment first, but go ahead.
Okay.
The one thing that I wanted to add too, as you invest in people, is making sure that when you hire these key people, that they're all locked up with non-competes, non-solicits, so you're protecting yourself as well. And I think the other important thing is to provide the right incentive plan. So figure out, as you hire that key person, what motivates them. Like, is there something that you need, like a phantom stock program, stock options, some kind of buy-in program to tie them in, so they're not at risk and your company's not at risk. You're still retaining the value as well as leveraging their good work that they're doing and what they're taking off of your plate. Some of the things that, when I've seen things go wrong, to address your question, is where the culture is not the same. I had a client who, his wife, it was a plant, and she cooked lunch for all of the workers in the plant every day. So she had a very nurturing culture. Her and her husband did not have anyone to take over the business. They didn't have any children. So they sold it to a third party, and it wasn't the right culture. And unfortunately, they needed to sell the business at that time due to health concerns. But it was that change in culture from a very nurturing environment to a totally different management style, and it never worked out. That's where I've seen things go terribly wrong for the next company. And they had like a loss in there. It was a loss to them too, because their company was their baby, and to see somebody kind of like come in and just it fall apart was very heartbreaking. With them, they did start a foundation, and they concentrated on providing scholarships to children who were in that at-risk category. So they kind of rechanneled their energies. So at the end of the day, like, they felt really good about what they were doing, but they were not happy with how things went with the company. So
that's tough. That's a risk for sure. Could happen, definitely.
Yeah, in terms of situations that haven't worked out, there was a case where a couple was going through a divorce and they didn't have a plan in place for the business, and they were trying to sell the business. Whole Foods came forward wanting to purchase the business at a $4 million valuation, but because of the divorce proceedings, they weren't able to get across the finish line, and the bid went away. So again, just planning is really the most important.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, Vance?
Yeah, I could probably give you 100 different examples that are sort of along the same lines of what we just heard, but I think it just goes back to plan early, plan often. And that's just the most important thing, because you never know when the opportunity is going to pop up, as Reshma has described, or there's just, you never know, and you got to be ready, and you'll never be fully ready, but being as ready as possible will hedge against those risks. And as Mike Tomlin, head of the coaches Steelers, says, he wants volunteers, not prisoners. So on his team. So drawing on what Paul said, culture again is, there's I think 11 million job openings in this country and 6 million people to fill them right now. So you got to have a place where people want to work and stay with you. So.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that's always good insight. And then one other thing around valuations that I wanted to discuss before we moved on to the next question, and if this might answer something else, but at what point is there an industry standard for, depending on what your industry is, for multiples? Are there any tips or thoughts that anyone on the panel can share from your perspective on what's too low, what's too high? Any advice that you can share that just for these business owners on the call to think about as they're thinking through and evaluating what they want to do for their succession plan? Any tips around that?
I'm going to let Vance and Nick and Joyce answer the question. What I could share with you from my lens is that when it comes to valuation, a few things are critical that I think we've been trying to incorporate into the business. So one is recurring revenue, right? When you're in an industry where you get paid once, that's tough to really create a long-standing relationship. So if you can find a way, and there's numerous ways to create recurring revenue, right? The fact that I pay God knows what per month to wash my car, they've done a good job of creating recurring revenue. I think there's a lot of opportunity for what we do as organizations to create recurring revenue. That goes a long way. If you can incorporate technology in any capacity, sometimes you can white label. I think we don't realize that there's an opportunity to white label technology that can be incorporated into your business. Significant opportunity for you there. And as I mentioned, I'll continue to mention being in the right industry, right? If you're in a fast growing industry that, and there's a couple, advanced manufacturing, renewable energy, robotics, it's 6 or 7 out there. It's not as difficult sometimes to pivot because a lot of times your clients are already in that space. So keeping those things top of mind can all help your multiplier moving forward. But again, as far as the numbers, again, I'll of course defer to the team.
Yeah, please.
Go ahead, Joyce.
The other thing I would add too is, as you're looking down that sale road, is make sure you're taking off, making sure your books are as clean as possible, right? So planning for that event, taking those cars off your books that are personal, taking those folks that may not be working that much, right, off of your book. So your financials are as clean as possible, and they reflect your actual business. Because I know I'm not the IRS, but I know there's a lot of things that probably go through your business that may not be as business related. So when you're looking to sale, you want to make sure your business looks as profitable as possible.
And I'll
I would just say that
go ahead, Vance.
With any third party, they're going to do what's called a quality of earnings study, which, as Joyce pointed, will normalize your earnings in both a positive and negative way, meaning things you shouldn't be running through your business will be taken off and actually improve your earnings, and other things will be added back. Will normalize compensation, et cetera. Actual multiples. Service businesses and construction companies tend to get the lowest. Construction, you're only as good as your last job. In services, there's not a lot of capital needed to do it. Like law firms are a great example. You can start a law firm with a laptop and a desk. There's no moat. So there's no multiples there. Manufacturing, I'd say 5 to 10 times your EBITDA. And that would probably apply to distributors as well. Technology companies, you typically see those as a multiple of sales, not so much earnings. And they could be anywhere from 5 to 20 times sales. It just depends on. I had an SEO, a search engine optimization company last year sell for like 22 times its revenue, which was like 300 million.
Yeah.
So I went up and told my kids to keep playing on their computers, right? Like, because I said, forget reading, just learn how to hack, like do something, like that. And they said, sure, Dad, but so I think it's all over the place. But again, it depends on your industry. Customer concentration hurts. And as Paul pointed out, recurring revenue is better than, non-recurring. That one-time big event will be normalized out of your EBITDA calculation because they're not going to count it again because it's not going to happen again, right? That's the point, which is like construction. You're not going to build a hospital in central Philadelphia, center city, twice. You build it once and go on to the next job. So that's sort of the issue.
Yeah, I agree. Recurring revenue, building out your pipeline, I think is really important. And that's another piece, especially if you don't have a specific asset within the company that you think is worth something. Your sales, your business development, your clients, your customer base is really important. That's one feature, right? Depending on the right potential investor, that's something they'll be looking at too.
Rash, can I
Sure.
Can I add one thing? And
Please.
I would love to even get the feedback from the panel. Because we've kind of started to get a little bit into the technology side, I've learned one thing that I think most business owners don't consider is how valuable the data is that you have. So what I mean by that is, in most cases, we're doing work in construction, we're doing work in services, and we're collecting data. The reason why technology firms are so valuable is not always the software, the platform, it's the data that they carry. So I ask us, and it doesn't matter what you do as a company, there's so many unique ways to look at your data, and data is the most valuable thing in technology, probably in the industry. So even though you're not doing technology, you may look up and realize, well, crap, we collect X amount on every construction job in Pennsylvania. Guess what? That's valuable for someone, right? And how do you put that in some type of platform? How do you monetize it? No different than what Google and Facebook do to us every day. So that'll be my recommendation around valuation that I'm learning more and more as we do work in the tech space is, what data do we capture? And is that valuable to someone? That changes your valuation because now Accenture is interested in you, right? Not for your product, for the data that you have.
Yep, absolutely. That relates definitely to the pipeline and those different parts of the business. Okay. So with that, I think this is really good. I'm seeing a lot of good questions, Aaliyah, that are popping up. So I want to work through this because I hope we can get to a lot of the questions that are being asked. But I wanted to touch on what are some of the tax implications for engaging M&A in your business? Is there any advice that the folks on the panel can share from your perspective?
Well, I'm a tax lawyer, so I'll jump in
Go
there.
ahead.
At a very high level, there's really two ways to look at it. You're either going to sell the equity, the stock, or the LLC units of your business. If it's a stock sale, it's going to be capital gain to you and the buyers. Well, if it's a corporation, they won't get any basis step up in the underlying assets. If it's an asset sale, there's a mix of ordinary income and capital gain to the seller. Buyers want asset sales, sellers want equity sales. Is the basic way to look at it. Most deals, I mean, unless you're in the 9-figure space, 100 million or up are typically asset sales, unless it's in a heavily regulated industry where licensing is important. So like construction, if you're PennDOT certified, you don't want to have to start over with your PennDOT certification. So you buy the stock of the seller and just, that's the way those deals work.
Right.
I can't think of another good example off the top of my head, but anything that's heavily regulated with licensing, where you don't have to want to reapply for those licenses, you generally have an equity sale. But otherwise, you typically see asset sales, and you got to figure out, you know, how you're going to allocate the purchase price, and that's just usually a point of negotiation between the buyer and the seller, between capital gain items and ordinary income items. So
Does that also vary, Vance, if they're an LLC, they're an S Corp, C Corp, does that play into some of the things that you just mentioned as well?
well, a C Corp, you never want to sell assets because there's double taxation to the seller. It's
Okay.
punitive. With an S Corp, it's sort of betwixt and between, because stock sales better for the seller, asset sales better for the buyer. With an LLC, it's taxed as a partnership or a single member. It doesn't exist. You're deemed to sell the asset, so
Okay.
you really can't treat it as a stock sale anyway. So it just depends on the type of entity. But you know, 9 out of 10 times you're looking at an asset sale. And not to bore you even more, but there's a way that you could structure a stock sale so that for tax purposes, it's a deemed asset sale. It's called a 338 election, which again, you haggle over and negotiate on the allocation of the purchase price.
That's great. I don't
But,
think
but buyers also don't want to buy your equity because they don't want to assume a bunch of unknown liabilities. They don't want to, you know, when they buy the assets, they only assume a distinct set of liabilities. Where if they buy the stock, they're getting everything whether they want it or they don't. And that could be a real turnoff for a buyer for obvious reasons.
Right. Wow, I think this is great information. Nicholas or Joyce, did you want to comment on that? From a financial perspective?
Yeah, and you know what, the way I look at things, I predominantly deal with the personal side. So where my brain first goes is you should be planning before that sale if you want to get any assets to the next generation or to beneficiaries. So making sure that you're transferring those assets earlier than the impending sale, and get a lower valuation on them. There's some techniques that you could do from an estate planning standpoint to get assets to the next generation. You could recapitalize your stock, have voting and non-voting stock, transfer the non-voting stock to that next generation. But you have to do that prior to the sale, way prior to even like starting the sale. So I think that's important if that's something you want to do. So that's what I would recommend if that's something that you would like to do and transfer to the next generation.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna ask maybe Vance or the team one question. Does it matter what state you're in? Because that's the other piece is
Yeah.
I was going to say it does, but go ahead. I know Vance can go ahead.
Yes. So when you're the seller, whatever state you're a resident of is going to apply the state income tax, you know, for the sale. So of course, Pennsylvania has a 3.07% income tax. You know, New York and New Jersey, California are very high. Massachusetts is high.
Yeah.
Illinois. The other thing is if you're going to do any kind of seller financing, which, you know, is often called an installment sale, just remember you can only installment sale certain assets. So you cannot installment sale what are called hot assets. So receivables, inventory, and cash equivalents. So you got to really think that through as to what your tax bill is going to be in the following year. And then in Pennsylvania, you cannot installment sale any personal property. So you can't installment sale stock or equipment or inventory, only real estate. So that's why you work with your team, you work with your accountant, and you really sharpen your pencil and figure out what is your walkaway number. The other thing I'll point out too is a lot of people forget that when you go to sell something, let's say your business is worth $10 million, but you have $2 million of debt that needs cleaned up at closing, right? So you get paid 10 million, you get taxed on 10 million, but you got to pay your bank 2 million at closing. No offense to the bankers, right? You owed it. You leave with 8 million, but you pay tax on 10. So you have to think about, you really got to know what your number is at the final number, and can you live with that? Otherwise, you don't do the deal. But people forget that debt assumption or debt relief, that counts. And I have had to explain it to people a number of times where they thought, oh, that doesn't count. You know, it's $1 for dollar. I'm like, no, it's really like $1.50 per dollar because you got to pay the tax on the money first. So, so again, that's just part of your deal and how you negotiate it. But, you know, some companies, some businesses are highly leveraged. They have a lot of inventory. They're working off a line of credit, which is all makes perfect business sense. But, you know, if you got to unwind a $4 million credit facility at closing, then, you know, that's $4 million of taxable income to you, the seller, and you've never seen the cash. So you just got to think about that.
Wow. Well, this has been very good advice and feedback so far. And so before we open it up to Q&A, I'd like to go around, and Paul, we can start with you first and then go down. What is one piece of advice that you'd like to give to the business owners on this call today, that if they're looking to exit their business through M&A or succession planning, that you can provide, other than what a lot of good advice you shared already? So Paul, I'll start with you.
No worries. I think the simplest thing is just to make time for it. That's all. Right?
Okay.
I think we look up and we're always busy with something on our calendar, and it's kind of that important versus urgent methodology that we're dealing with. If you can just block off 30 minutes a day until the end of the year, I think there's nothing more makes you feel more confident about your business if you know your numbers. And then the next level is if you know your valuation and you know what the succession planning is, you feel even more confident, which allows you to make better decisions. So back to my data, I'm big on data. And it's like now you have the data to really evaluate your business holistically. So just make time. It's one of those things where in the moment, it's like hiring the COO. It doesn't feel like it's the right thing to do, or you feel as though it's too early. And then after you do it, you go, man, I should have did this 3 years ago. It's one of those things. You guys all know how that feels. So that'll be my number one advice. And I wish everyone the best of luck.
Very cool. Nice. Okay. Vance?
Well, since election day is tomorrow, like they say, vote early, vote often. I would tell you to plan early and plan often. So again, get with your advisors. I know people hate spending money on professional services, myself included, and I'm a professional service provider. But if you find the right ones, they can help. They're worth it. It's a good investment. And that, and just openly, don't be afraid to communicate with the right people, either in your family, in your business, or elsewhere, and get, and start messaging what's going to happen eventually. It's very important to be transparent as possible.
Definitely. Okay. Nicholas?
I would say just to echo that, but also just coordinate amongst your various advisors that you're currently working with. The other is to, when you're getting that valuation work done, do it outside of the time that you're thinking of selling, obviously, but also do it with somebody who's done work in your space, so they have expertise in your vertical, so that it's not the first time they're evaluating a business in that discipline.
And Joyce?
Yeah, I would say all of the above. Coordinate with your advisors is most important, and make sure that your advisors are still suiting your needs. Because one of the things that I've seen too is, your people still utilizing the same CPA or the same person that was advising them in the very beginning, and maybe they don't suit their needs anymore, and maybe that person knows they're out of their element, but there's that personal relationship. It's okay to add to your advisors and to continue to upgrade, you have to feel comfortable with whom your advisors are, and you have to gather them and leverage them around the table to have the best outcome for yourself. So leverage your advisors and continue to network and find folks that suit your needs.
I agree. I concur with what a lot of the panelists have said. And I know from my perspective, the biggest advice that my team has given me throughout this couple-month journey that we've been going through is be very clear on what you want and what your goals are, because on the other end, they're going to be able to see through it, and you don't want on the other end to get tricked or bamboozled or anything like that, and then you end up losing everything that you worked for. So I think the clearer you are on what your goals are and what you want your outcome to be, the better you'll have a good, successful succession or an M&A or whatever, private equity, whatever you choose to do. So thank you with that. So thank you, Joyce and Aaliyah. We open it up to answer any questions.
Perfect. Oh, first of all, I want to thank the panel. Oh my goodness. I feel like it was a well-rounded perspective of succession planning, estate planning. So I want to thank all of our subject matter experts for joining us and participating today. I think it was a conversation that was well needed, and I'm so happy that we was able to collaborate and have this conversation with Joyce and WeBank and the rest of the WeBank team. So I want to thank you guys again for participating. And I was over here taking notes. I was in class just now learning so much. So I hope everyone was able to take a few things away. Some important things that I've just taken away with the transparency, making sure that you're being transparent about your needs and where you are in your business. Like Paul said, find time. Like time is just moving. Estate planning may not be your priority, or succession planning, but you don't want to wait until it's too late to make a first decision on the fly. So make sure that you're finding time, coordinate with your advisors, making sure they still fit your needs. We've been getting a lot of information. So let me see, I'm going to go up a little bit, and I feel like a lot of these questions may have been answered, but we're going to make sure that we're just clear on making sure that our attendees are able to walk away with some clear answers. And
So there's one,
there's
I don't think was answered.
No, yeah, it's few. I'm up here scrolling up, Joyce, but I just wanted to let you guys know that we are very thankful for our subject matters on the panel right now, subject matter experts. But please make sure you have a relationship with your banking advisors. And if you do not, we have Citizens and PNC available. I'll be happy to give you the contact information for the subject matter experts on the panel. But you can always take these questions back to the person that the organization that you're banking with. So I see a question that stuck out to me, and Joyce, please make sure that you find some that I looked over. Does this include nonprofits? So if we have anyone on the call that's interested because you're on a nonprofit and you're looking on how to successfully plan for your nonprofit, can anyone answer how these specific situations relate to nonprofit organizations?
Joyce mentioned that, but Joyce, go. I know you touched on a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I touched on it briefly, but you have to look at your board. You have to look at, where your nonprofit is now. You have to be a little bit more careful with nonprofits. Maybe it makes sense to scale down and do a donor advised fund. That might be a little bit easier if you don't want to manage a foundation anymore, if you don't have folks that you could count on to manage it. But it's the same, it's similar to the same business succession. Who do you want to carry on this mission, and how do you want to keep that mission going? I mean, those are very, recruiting the right person, right? Getting the right board members are all really crucial to continuing that mission. So it's very similar to any business. It just has a difference from a tax perspective because there's not a tax implication.
And Aaliyah, I had a question which I thought that's come up through this process that might help others on this call, and I think our panelists might be able to answer it. Is one of the things that has been brought to my attention is when you go through this process, you're going to need a board. You mentioned it, Joyce, so it just kind of hit me. But are there any tips or thoughts on creating a board of directors and how that relates to this? Because I think that's a big piece that you have to consider when you're doing succession planning and M&A. I didn't know if anybody wants to take that one, but I thought it'd be a good topic.
Nice. Let's get to it.
Yeah.
Anybody have any input on that question?
Yeah, I would. There's a difference between having, a fiduciary board and then an advisory board. And most family businesses are not going to have a fiduciary board because people don't want that risk as advisors. But an advisory board can serve essentially the same role, where you have people that are knowledgeable in your industry, or in certain other skill sets you may need, like, human capital, that can, meet quarterly or whatever, and you could just bounce things off them. Kind of like your own personal Vistage or, some other kind of group like that. I have clients that have them and really find them to be very valuable and helpful, because it's good to kind of take off your blinders and have other people sort of critically, but, helpfully evaluate what you're doing, whatever that may be. So.
I also think the other thing that people have found valuable is having a junior board where they have that next generation, want to involve that next generation. It's a way to have your next generation have a voice and gauge interest as far as what you want to do from a business succession plan. So I've seen that been done really successfully, and both the older generation and the younger generation getting a lot out of it.
Nice. I love that point, Joyce. Thank you for that. Forward thinking for our next generation, include them with your junior board. So thank you for that question, Reshma. I definitely think that touched a few. And I also have something that may have came up twice, and I'm almost sure we spoke about it, but I just want to make sure that we're clear on relaying this information. How do we recommend firms that do evaluations? I heard Vince and I heard Nicholas speak a little bit about this, I believe, but if you guys can be a little bit more clear on the type where we could find firms that can do these evaluations for these businesses.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Depending upon the size of the business that's in question, there are different avenues for valuations. I can say that I've recently done valuations for businesses through providers at no cost. So there are insurance companies that will provide valuation work for clients based upon 3 years of tax returns, based upon price to book, price to earnings, some standard metrics for perhaps valuation. So that's one. The other is, firms that are dedicated in that space, whether it's in middle market space or whether it's other size companies. There are resources. We certainly have them here at Citizens, irrespective of the size. And I'm sure other panelists as well can speak to the resources that can be brought to bear for those valuations.
Nice. Definitely some key points to remember. And I do also remember Joyce mentioning making sure, I believe you mentioned, Joyce, I'm sorry, so much good information flying around that you want to make sure someone that's familiar, that you select someone that's familiar with your specific industry and your type of business, so that it won't be like shooting in the dark, I believe someone mentioned. So that may be relevant to making sure your evaluation is on point.
Absolutely. And know the purpose for your valuation too, whether it be for a sale or estate planning. And typically I recommend, if it's estate planning, to have your attorney order that valuation, so it's covered by attorney-client privilege if the IRS decides to say they don't like your valuation down the road. So that's typically what we recommend.
You can tell me you have a dead body in your trunk. I can't tell anybody. So I'd say put one there, just FYI.
Nice. Definitely one of the key points to remember. And I do have another question. If anybody else wanted to piggyback on that answer, I do have another question that's asking, what are the 3 top keys you look for in evaluation to start the succession planning? What are some of the 3 top things that you're looking for in an evaluation? Okay, so I guess when you're selecting a company or a professional insurance company to do your evaluation, what should we be looking for? Vance, Nicholas, or Joyce, what would you suggest?
Well, I mean, it helps if they have the professional credentialing you usually see with that. So for an accountant, it's going to be what's called a CVA or an ABV, which are you do extra coursework and then you go through all these classes and get certified. There's one other, I can't remember what it is, but someone has to have those credentials, and if not, they have to really be otherwise super qualified. And I mean, they probably work for an investment bank and they're used to brokering businesses on a large scale. So that, the quality of the report, just in general, that it's there's sort of a way they're always done and the data they include. And then if it is for a family transaction, meaning a gift and not a sale, there's a IRS, what's called a revenue ruling they reference called 5960, which you'll want to see that in the report itself, and because that's what it's meant to the standard is supposed to meet. So
Nice. Ooh, so happy this is recorded. We get to run this back and get some of these terms down. Thank you so much for that, Vance. I think that touched right on it. So make sure people are accredited. So Joyce, was there something up here? I think I'm at the bottom, but I'm trying to scroll up. See if it's
So there was one question. Reshma, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to also make one other comment in addition to what Vance just said. When you eventually find your valuation company that you're working with, banker, however you're going about it, one thing that I know is important for us is you're going to be making a lot of different changes and iterations once you get that feedback. So you want to also make sure that you're negotiating with them in the sense of you're able to change and edit, because you're going to have to make changes. And sometimes some valuation companies are going to come back and say, no, they're going to charge you X amount more for that, versus the framework's already there. All you're doing is maybe changing a couple of the graphs and the projections based on your analysis. So that's just, I wanted to throw that out there to make sure you discuss that, because you will be changing it.
Awesome, thank you. So I have a question from Catherine in the chat. Then I have Colette who had her hand raised, and then I have someone, I believe Martina, who may have a question. So the question from Catherine is, I'm a bookkeeper and a grant writer for Impact Enterprises. When data collection comes up in our conversation, my potential clients' eyes cloud over. Any suggestions for helping my clients value setting up data collection systems in advance? And Paul, you touched on this, the value of data. I'd love to hear your point again about the value of data early before this M&A process.
Of course. So I remember, again, data is uniquely valuable to different parties. It all depends who you're selling to, who your customers are. It's always critical to understand, I'm not sure who your end client is, what are their KPIs, right? How do they make decisions? Once you understand that information, it makes it easier for you to decide if your data is relevant for that organization. Again, I'll use the construction only because I know this is a real example with the company. Is the construction firm had data around how long projects took, right? The skill sets that were aligned to those projects. They knew all the supply chain that was involved. That data was valuable to some of the prime contractors, right? So it could be daycare data, it could be marketing data, it could be marketing materials, it could be accounting. We all capture data in some capacity. And my data is different it may not be valuable to the pharmaceutical industry, but it may be valuable to an accounting firm, right? So it all depends on what information is valuable to that organization. And that's just something, again, I recommend as you progress through our journey, start to keep top of mind and start to ask your customers what information is important, especially larger clients, right? That's a great question to ask maybe their CIO, their growth officer, if you get a chance, their CEO. And that's why and again, when you talk to these evaluation companies, find out from them when companies are purchased, what data was that company did they have access to? Because you may look up and you have access to the same data as well.
Awesome. Anyone else want to chime in before we head over to Colette, who has a question? Any panelists want to chime in here?
I did see a question on here. I'm definitely looking forward to Colette's question. But I just want to make sure that we don't miss, because this is something we spoke about, Joyce, when planning this session. Any recommendations on the best way to maintain WBE status in succession planning? So if they're a WBE and they're looking to sell their business or pass it down to a son or a relative that may be a male or anything like that, I'm guessing is that something, I guess, Paul or Reshma, you can answer. Is that something that you guys thought about your current certifications when considering your options for estate planning or succession planning?
I'll just take, I mean, I know from our perspective, that was one of the big things, considering that my mom started the business for us. So we had the women and the diversity status, minority status was really big for us. And then continuing that forward. So for me,
But I still log in case they send the slides.
Let's go ahead and mute, please, folks. I
Oh,
appreciate that.
Sorry, yeah. So for us, that was a big thing that we factored in, and it's always a big thing that I'm factoring in for my potential private equity firms that I'm looking at and for us. So it's something where, again, I'm very clear and I know what I want from these potential people, and I'm not giving up anything less than, I'm keeping 51% or more of this company till it scales to where it needs to get in my gold timeframe. And then it's okay at that point. So I think it's just for us, we were very clear, I'm very clear on what kind of partner I want investing in this company. And then I know what I'm not going to give up. So, and then that way you can keep your status.
Yeah, so I wanted to follow up on that. So there's kind of two ways PE deals work. And I think what Reshma is describing is just like an equity investment where someone's going to pay X dollars for 30% of your business with the hope of growing it to the next level, and then everyone gets an exit, right? That's the idea, which is a great way to grow. I mean, PE, outside investors, there's no monthly interest payments. They're going to be patient with you. People look at having an other owner as a problem. Well, if you borrow money from the bank, they own that much of your business anyway. It's just they're not flexible. They want to be repaid. And again, nothing against banks, but a combination of debt and equity investment is not a bad idea. The other way they typically work is they buy sort of your whole business, but they have you roll over 10 or 20% of your purchase price because you have to stay on and run the business for a few years. So again, plan early, plan often. You say, I want to sell in 5 years. Well, when you sell in 5 years, you might have to work for 2 more years because what they're buying in part is you, and they're going to make you sign an employment agreement. They're going to have you have a non-compete, but you got to stick around and roll up your sleeves still because you're part of the deal. And then one day there's a second exit, which oftentimes, if it's done right, that 20% you rolled over is worth more than the 80% you sold on the front end. I've seen that happen a number of times. And that's a real home run. So.
Yeah, there's one other aspect I think that's critical, whether you're an MBE or WBE, you have to be careful of, and this is, I think, being pretty transparent. If the bulk of your business is completely dependent on your status, I think that does impact the sales, right? Because if that's a non-MBE firm that's purchasing your company and that's not their strategy, or they don't have that relationship, it's tough for them to scale the business. So I think sometimes looking at how much of my business is, hey, the certification helped versus this organization doesn't even know we're certified, that's good information for you to know. Right? Just so I'm sure that's going to come up in your evaluation, or if you get to that point of conversation is, hey, if we lose this status, do we lose the business? And I think you need to be aware of that and be conscious of how you can be impacted. There are numerous ways for you to maintain the status. I've seen private equity firms that are MBE and WBE private equity firms, right? Of course, you can sell your firm to another MBE or to another WBE. So there's options, but I think, again, just being aware and conscious of where you stand, and that's part of that initial succession planning as well.
That's an excellent point, Paul. And I don't want to rain on anyone's parade, but just, this isn't happening here, but I've seen other clients say, oh, I'm gonna have my wife own 51% of the business so I can be WBE. If that's not legit and a real thing, and you get audited, that's what's called a crime. So because you've done nothing but defraud the government into government contracts, thinking they're giving business to a legitimately owned WBE business, in my example, you don't want to end up doing 10 years in prison because you're faking a status, right? That is not a game plan at all. So don't get lured into like, oh, I can be, pull a fast one. And, your spouse has never been in the business, doesn't really come into work, doesn't do anything. Because when you get caught, you're going to go to jail. that's what happens. So.
Thank you for that, Van. It sounds like I should have had my certification manager on this call for that.
Yeah, listen, I'm a lawyer. I'm nothing but a downer. Like just, you know, like the,
No,
I'm
but
a lot of fun
that's
at
what
cocktail
that's
parties,
what
as
we're
I
here
say. So,
for. That was some great perspectives from all sides. So I definitely appreciate everyone tagging in on that one. Colette, did you want to get your question in? I think I have like one or two more in the chat.
Yes, ma'am. And first of all, I want to thank you and the WeBank for putting this together and so much work on your orchestration. And thank you for including PNC Bank. We appreciate it. But I did want to mention that several times I've been afforded the opportunity to look at financing an organization on a buyout, whereby they are either they did their evaluation, they have to do another one, someone's buying a business. The only thing I can say or a recommendation is that if you're planning on purchasing a business or acquiring, I should say it is an acquisition, make sure you have experience in that field if you're looking for bank financing. Because as Paul had said earlier, if you're a minority-owned business and you're purchasing a business that doesn't have minority-owned contracts, how will you survive? So really looking at the plan of the acquisition and your experience in that industry. That's it. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Colette, for that. And I think we have just a few more questions. I hope you guys are getting all that you came for, because woo, been a lot of valuable information floating around. And I think that all you guys kind of hit on this question, but we're going to go back to it just to make sure that Susan is clear on what she's trying to understand here. Just asking in general, how to decide when to stay or go, especially if the business is growing steadily. So when's a good time to make that decision? Paul, I think you mentioned it quite a few times, speaking of the data and planning. So did you want to answer that question?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, Leah, that's a different question. That's asking how much money, what's my number is what I'm taking away from that question. I could be wrong if I'm not asking.
Okay,
Yeah.
how to decide when to stay or go. Yep, especially if the business is steadily growing. Yeah, maybe talk about the annual revenue.
Yeah, I think so. So here's what I've learned, and everyone has a different number. That's where it goes back to, I have 3 kids. I have a 16-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a 3-year-old. So, which means that I'll be a dad forever, right? At least for another 30, 40 years, I'll be taking kids to school. But the reason why that's critical is I have to look at my personal financial expectation. When do I want to retire, right? What kind of life does my wife and my kids need to have? What's my number? My number may be different from someone else. I'm from Jamaica. I may just want to go back and buy a small house and hang out in Jamaica for the rest of my life, right? Someone may want to move to California. So I think truly slowing down to figure out what's a number that I will walk away from and feel comfortable. And I'll share this again openly. I think as business owners, sometimes we forget the reason why we're in business, right? The goal is sometimes a financial goal, right? And we don't think about it. We're just sometimes so much in the mission, the vision, and you end up. I talk to owners that are they've owned business for years and say, Paul, don't make the mistake of not thinking about what your number is, because you could work hard and then look up and maybe the business never sells and you pass it off to someone, and that person you pass it off to, you're disappointed in what happened, right? Or you just never pass it off and the business slowly closes. So again, understanding what your number is between you, yourself, your spouse, your kids, your leadership team. And if that number is 8 million and you look up and your business is worth 8 million, you should make a decision, right? So that'll be my recommendation for that. But again, I would love to hear the panel's personal perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things to know is that valuation that you're worth, and we talked earlier in the conversation around multiples. Multiples don't necessarily dovetail with your succession plan. And so there may be many people on this call who are serial entrepreneurs. And if they get that valuation, even while it's not at the time that they were thinking about a succession, that they recognize that the valuation is too valuable to ignore, and maybe looking at their next phase of their businesses. So I think, again, going back to the idea of knowing what the multiples are, knowing what your business is worth, and with that information, you can make more informed decisions.
Yeah, I would agree. I would leverage your advisors, do the math, and things change, right? It's not a one and done. So, I mean, we've all seen that with the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic, people have looked at, okay, maybe it is my time to retire. So I think it's constantly changing. Do the math with your advisors and leverage the folks around you, your CPA, your financial planners, your attorneys. Get everybody around the table and do it on a regular basis.
Nice. Thank you, guys. Think that definitely holds a lot of weight. So we do have one more question. So if anybody else has any more questions, feel free, because we have these guys on the line, and this doesn't happen quite often. So I really appreciate you guys. Again, I'm gonna keep on thanking you guys for joining us and participating in this discussion. Because We Bank East and EMSDC, we were very intentional in making sure that we collaborated on this effort. So I'm happy that we're all here today. So we do have another question. Where do you think is the best place for a solo entrepreneur to start when thinking about this succession planning? And I think we've asked this question in different ways, but I think we just want to hit it on the head one more time in regards to a solo entrepreneur and when should they think about succession planning?
Well, again, I'd say early and often. So if there's any golfers on the line, someone once told me, the best way to play a golf hole is backwards, right? You start in the green and go back and figure out your shots you're going to hit. So with your business, I mean, the day you incorporate or set it up, you should say to yourself, when am I getting out and how? Now that's a very fluid thing, but if you want to exit in 10 years or 15 or 12 or whatever it is, you got to work back from that point and just try to figure out what is the path to get there. Knowing there's going to be a lot of zigzagging and it's never going to be linear, right? I mean, and you got to constantly be reevaluating that. And that is sometimes an exhausting thing to do. And as Paul pointed out earlier, it's hard to make time to do it because it's not really making any money today, right? So, but it's a valuable exercise. And for starting, I mean, there's lots of books out there. I mean, I would tell you to try to find a mentor if you can. I mean, someone who's a little older or at the very least a little wiser and can help you, just willing to spend, even a half hour a month where you get breakfast or whatever and just, sit down and talk about things. So there's lots of people out there that are willing to do that. In my experience, at least in my part of the world.
Hey, Leah, and I'm not sure, just for clarity, and when we say solopreneur, we're saying that's an individual by themselves, correct? Like no employees, I assume?
I assume, where do you think the best place for a solo entrepreneur to start when thinking, yep, I guess they're working and maintaining their company on their own?
Yeah. So I guess my question, maybe again for Vance and Joyce and Eka, is how often does a solopreneur sell their company, right? Because I think that's that may be a different model, right? Versus you have a 100-person company, right? What type of solo companies have you worked with, and have you done that in the past? And that's more for me, just to really understand, because I get that asked a lot too, and I really don't know how common that is.
Well, yeah, I mean, none. I mean, no one's probably going to buy a single person business unless it's one heck of a lemonade stand, or they really want whatever talent you have, So I think if I understood that, it's more like, how do I get to that 100-person level? That's what I'd think. Otherwise, I mean, again, the same thing is, the same principles apply, but it's just a much different analysis and process. If you're really just going to be you, like you're a single person, you're probably in a service business. So again, not a big multiple when you exit. As I tell the lawyers, I'll just steal your clients. I'm not going to buy them from you, right? So, or just take them. Eventually you'll fizzle out. So I think, I think it's more getting to what you've described in the back end.
I agree, Vance. I just think sometimes it's critical to state that if you are a solo company, it's not, no one's gonna, I haven't seen too many purchases, right? It tends to be an organization with processes and people and technology and customers, and I don't know what the minimum number is But I think really understanding that baseline is key. It's not to say we can't work towards it, but you also understand when you're not, that's not an option for you at all, but it doesn't mean you can't start, right? So I just want to be clear.
We all start somewhere.
Yeah,
So.
perfect.
Yes. Well, it looks like we're running out of time. I think we made sure we got every minute out of this session today. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us today. Again, my name is Aaliyah, EMSDC. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up that we will be sending out a survey to get some feedback. Let us know if you guys want to talk about some more sessions similar to this topic. We'll be happy to collaborate. Give me an excuse to collaborate with WeBank again. I'm looking forward to it. And also want to give you guys a heads up that I want to thank my NBIC, Paul and Reshma for joining the call. We have an upcoming session, the 21st of this month, that's going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure bill and some of the opportunities that will arise for our diverse vendors from that new bill. So please make sure you check us out on November the 21st. Also, we have our annual Choice Awards Gala that's going to be on December 1st here in Philadelphia. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there. So if you have any questions about registering or being a sponsor, please, our website is up. Feel free to connect with anyone from my team. And also we have our Super Matchmaker coming first quarter, January 25th. So if you guys want to connect with some of our awesome corporate partners like the ones on the call, first of all, I want to make sure I thank Colette from PNC Bank for bringing on Joyce from our wealth planning department. I really appreciate you guys and your time and effort. And also I want to thank Lawrence Wooten from Citizens Bank for bringing on Nicholas. And WeBank for bringing on Vance. Vance, you was the icing on the cake today. So we appreciate all that you added to this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us, guys. You will receive a recording and a survey after this session ends. So thank you again for joining us, and I wish you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Shauna, thank you so much. You can go ahead and end the recording, please.